Let's look at Introduction to Mark. I have given some bibliography that you can look at as you get time. And maybe some other books if you can have. All right. The authorship of the Gospel of Mark. As with the other gospel, second gospel gives no explicit indication of the authorship. Gospel of Matthew doesn't say it is written by Matthew, but we looked at the reasons why we believe, the external reasons and internal reasons. We looked at why it is written by Levi, the Matthew. In the same way, Mark doesn't say who wrote it, right? But the consistent tradition of the early church, however, says that it was composed by a companion of Peter. Basically, mainly, this is from Peter, who was, and of course, written by Mark, who was a companion of Peter. Even some of the scholars would say Mark is the Gospel of Peter. You know, Mark is the Gospel of Peter. So, because we know that his name is John Mark, or simply Mark, right? In the book of Acts, you see that there was an issue with Paul and Peter, and you will see this name of John Mark there, right? Let's look at the external evidence. So the earliest witness to the authorship of Mark is coming from the superscription. As I said, it's not inspired. What? Superscription is not inspired, but it says Kata Markan, according to Mark, right? And so that is the first, that is the earliest thing that you see in his gospel, all right? So, and maybe according to Mark, it can mean many things, but most of the church fathers believe that this is written by John Mark. All right. A general consensus is that superscription was added early in the transmission of text to identify its author and distinguish this gospel from others. So that is what you understand, right? It is written by Mark. So in all the early manuscripts and copies, you would read Kata Markan to identify this gospel from other gospels and to tell that this is from Mark. And the first, we call apostolic father, Pappy, as we already discussed, who was lived from AD 70 to 150, and according to Eusebius, he states that the presbyter used to say, that is, presbyter, Apostle John says that Mark became Peter's interpreter, right? Peter's interpreter. John Mark became Peter's interpreter and wrote accurately all that he remembered, not indeed in order of the things said and are done by the Lord. For he had not heard the Lord, nor had he followed him. But later on, as I said, he followed Peter, who used to give his teaching according to the needs of hearers, but not as though he were making a connected account of the Lord's oracles. So then Mark made no mistake in thus recording some of the things as he remembered them. And he made it his one concern not to omit anything of the things he heard or make any false statements in them. All right. So that is what he said. Right. So here Papias explained this way few things. This is what Papias wants to say. Mark had not been a personal follower of Jesus like Peter. Mark was not a disciple, not an apostle like Peter. But Mark was a Peter's companion, right? And wasn't in attendance wherever Peter preached. Mark accurately recorded what he heard and remembered of Peter's preaching about the Lord. And even though he did not follow a precise chronological sequence. The another idea of what Papias wants to say is this: Mark was Peter's interpreter. Although this expression has been understood in a number of ways, it is best to take in the sense that Mark recorded and disseminated the gospel. Peter proclaimed, rather than in the sense that he translated Peter's message from one language to another. So the gospel of Mark is actually the gospel of Peter in a sense. John the Elder is generally taken as a reference to the Apostle John or to disciple of the apostles. In either case, Papias' statement was understood by the early church as preserving the Johannine tradition on the authorship of the second gospel. Right? So what do we get here from Papias, one of the early men who was there? He said, Gospel of Mark is actually a gospel of Peter. Whatever Peter preached, Mark recorded. Right? Because Mark never followed Jesus when he was on this earth. It happened later. And then we have Justin Martyr in his Memoirs of Peter, in which Jesus applied the title Boazers, the sons of thunder, right, to the sons of Zebedee. Since this title is found only in Mark 3:17, Justin must have had the second gospel when he was talking about this one. When he used the word Boazers, the sons of thunder, for the sons of Zebedee. And so he's referring to the Gospel of Mark, because only Mark says that Boazers. The next one, Andy Maschenite Prologue in AD 170. So this is very early, right? We read Mark was the interpreter of Peter. After the death of Peter, he wrote down this same gospel in the regions of Italy. All right, understand. And this statement also supports the tradition of Mark's authorship of the second gospel and adds that it was composed in Italy following Peter's death. Next one, Irenaeus, another church father. All right, he says, Matthew also issued a written gospel among Hebrews. Remember, we already looked at that one. While Peter and Paul were preaching in Rome, laying the foundation of the church. After their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, himself also transmitted to us, writing the things preached by Peter. Thus, Irenaeus also supports the Markan authorship. Clement of Alexandria in Hippotyposes, all right, that's the name of the place, provides some variation to the above tradition in two statements preserved by Eusebius. When Peter had publicly preached the word in Rome, right, declared the gospel by the Spirit, those who present, of whom there were many, besought Mark, as one who had followed him for a long time and remembered the things said, to record his words. Having done so, he delivered the gospel to those who made the request of him. When Peter learned of it, maybe this Clement of Alexandria is the one who just makes a little difference in the story. He says, when Peter learned of it, he neither forbade nor encouraged it. However, in another place, Eusebius records Clement was saying that when Peter learned by a revelation from the Spirit what Mark had done, he was pleased with the zeal of the men and ratified the writing for the use in the church. So as you read the history, you get the idea how Mark wrote his gospel. Basic consensus, and if you take even Origen, right? The basic consensus will be that, for example, he says Mark is the second gospel, and where he represents Peter's eyewitnesses account, goes back to the beginning of the 2nd century. And so basically, most of the church fathers agrees that Gospel of Mark is written by Mark as an interpreter of Peter. So Mark learned Jesus and his life from Peter, right? And he recorded it. All right, now let's look at some biblical evidences. What we looked at the external, now some internal. First of all, we saw that there are no explicit references in the Markan gospel to say that it is written by Mark, but at the same time, the content of his gospel is wholly consistent with that of the New Testament records of Peter's gospel and Mark's authorship. Probably this may be the first time that you are hearing Peter's background behind the Gospel of Mark. All right, let's look at some of the features. The author includes several Aramaic expressions attributed to Jesus and not found in the other Gospels. All right, there are many Aramaic expressions. These have been explained as Mark vividly recollecting the exact phrases Peter used in describing the Lord's words. Okay? The reason why Mark gave that word, because he remembers in Peter's sermons the exact words that he used. Another point. Details found in Mark's gospel, it is asserted that at best explained as reflecting the viewpoint of eyewitnesses. If you really look at it, as if someone has really seen those events. For example, while such is found in all four gospels, the critical appraisal of the 12 is particularly vivid in Mark, critically appraising the 12 disciples. And thus, it is suggestive, it is an apostolic viewpoint for an apostle would have been so bold as to criticize the 12 so harshly, even in the gospel. So what you will read is that even in the appraisal of Jesus' appraisal of the apostles, Mark words are very strong. How can Mark write so strongly these words? That is a question, even when apostles were being criticized. And so the idea is that it is Peter's statement. Along similar lines, second gospel also contains details relating to the life and ministry of Peter, not found in other gospels. Interestingly. All right, life and ministry of Peter. There are details, and we don't have time to look at. So, if you wanted to have some more understanding of what we're saying, go and look at these verses. How Mark explains Peter. Conclusion drawn from this: that such details reflect Peter's personal involvement in the events and activities Mark has recorded. So. So far, probably the understanding was that, all right, you have in the gospel writers, where is the involvement of Peter? Right. That question is answered when you look at the background of Mark gospel. A number of studies have supported the relationship between the structure of Mark's gospel and the outline of the gospel story given by Peter, recorded in Acts chapter 10. Okay, what you read in Acts chapter 10, Peter is preaching the gospel. And if you look at that outline, the structure of that one, and compare the gospel of Mark, wow, structural relationship can be seen. The specific of these similarities are discussed below in the section addressing structure and outlines of the gospel. Okay. Now, point number, it is commonly argued that the nameless young man in the Garden of Gethsemane who fled when the Lord was arrested was John Mark. That was an argument, maybe a debate among some of the scholars. This event is found only in Mark's gospel and occurred after the apostles and other disciples had already fled. All right? It is in Mark chapter 14. There is an event. There was a young man saw Jesus was arrested, right? And he fled. All right? You want to look at that one? Let's look at that verse. If you have a Bible, please open. Because maybe you might think, okay, I have never seen anything like that. Mark 14. Okay. Mark 14. Can one of you read from verse 50 to 52? Mark 14. Can one of you read, please? Anyone? If you have opened. Okay. All right. If you have not, okay, I have got that verse here. This is what you read. Then everyone deserted him and fled. Verse 51, a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus when they seized him. Then we read, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. All right, that's a verse. That's a verse. Okay, a young man, everyone fled. That's what verse 50 says, including all the apostles when Jesus was arrested. And then verse 51 says, young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. This is something that no one has recorded other than Mark himself. So the explanation for its inclusion is that the author was a young man described in the incident. While not supporting Mark by name, yes, it doesn't say this was Mark. It is in harmony with the fact that John Mark was a resident of Jerusalem. You read that in Acts chapter 12. And with the fact that the tradition says that Mark was not a follower, that is a disciple of the Lord. He was not the disciple of the Lord. The account in the second gospel clearly distinguishes this individual from the Lord's disciples. All right, so there's one hint, maybe it's a suggestion that it was him as a young man at that time. Finally, while Mark was a common name in New Testament time, there is only one by that name in the New Testament who is mentioned as a close associate with Peter, called Peter's son in 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 13, right? 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 13 says, so who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, send you her greetings, and so does my son Mark. My son Mark. And who is also referenced several times in Acts, many times. And the New Testament epistles, for example, Colossians, you see his name. Philemon, you see his name. No, yes, this is it's Philemon. All right, chapter 2. And 2 Timothy, you see his name, who is sufficiently well known that he's identified his name alone with further qualification that is simply Mark. He doesn't want to even say John Mark, the individual associated with the second gospel. Okay, so what is our conclusion? Conclusion is not much. We basically believe, looking at the external evidences and the internal evidences, that it is written by John Mark himself. All right, Gospel according to Mark. Point number C, the place of composition and internal audience. As we've seen, consistent testimony of the early church is that Mark's gospel was written in Rome, principally for Roman audience. All right. If Matthew's gospel was written maybe in Jerusalem, this is written in Rome. One exception to this testimony comes from Chrysostom, who lived in 4th century. He claimed that Mark's gospel had been written in Egypt. Chrysostom's lone voice on this matter has generally been rejected, and most of the testimony says that it is written in Rome. All right. For example, Eusebius would say, Mark is said to have been the first man to set out for Egypt and preach there the gospel which he had himself written down. Chrysostom, it is argued, mistakenly thought that Eusebius was identifying Egypt as the place where Mark had composed his gospel. Whereas all Eusebius had said was this: after writing the gospel, Mark went to Egypt to preach. So Mark wrote the gospel in Rome, right? And later then he went to Egypt to preach the gospel. Okay, I'm not going to spend much time here about Roman audience, right? Not going to spend much time here. Basically, it is written to Roman audience. Of course, if you wanted to spend some time, you can spend. And when it was written, right, date is a little need to be clarified. For different dates for Mark's gospel recently have been championed, or within the first century. The four dates that Mark wrote in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even the 70s. Right? People have difference of opinion. Some say that he wrote in 40s, some say 50s, 60s, even 70s. Assuming the accuracy of the tradition which places composition of the second gospel either shortly before or shortly after Peter's death in Rome, and locating Peter's death in the later part of Nero's reign, most probably in the 60s. According to the unanimous testimony of the early church, only two of the options appear viable. It could be 50s and 60s. Could be 50s or 60s. All right, that is what we wanted to say about, because, of course, the biggest incident that took place in Jerusalem during the apostolic time was the Roman capture of Jerusalem, right? Which is not being explained by many people, which is interesting, and which suggests that it's been written before. Okay, so I'm not going to spend much time, because we will spend time for other matters that are needed. So please, if you wanted to read, this is something that you can read by yourself, right, about the dates. All right, now let's look at the occasion and purpose. Occasion and purpose. Occasion. Based on the reconstruction of historical circumstances as argued above, Mark's gospel was written in the mid-60s in proximity with the death of Peter. Very close to Peter's death. It could be a little before or could be a little after. In addition, it was written initially for those in Rome among whom Peter had labored. Now, there are a lot of evidences from the earliest writing that Peter spent considerable time in Rome. Connecting Peter's death with the persecution of Christians under Nero, and combining this with the emphasis in Mark's gospel on suffering, right? On suffering, immediate occasion for Mark's writing appears twofold. First, the passing of the apostle, the Christian community in Rome desired to have a written record of the gospel that Peter had proclaimed. Most probably that is the reason. What is the reason? Peter is died. Here is a group of believers in Rome who desire to have a written record of Peter's gospel. Second, perhaps more pressing, Mark wrote in response to severe persecution the initial readers were beginning to face at the hands of the Roman authorities. Because Mark explains about persecution in his quite a bit, in Jesus' words about persecution, quite a bit in his gospel. So that could be the occasion. So please understand, why we explain these occasions. This is important as you preach God's word from the gospel, so that you can have tell why the author has written this one. Now let's look at the purpose. Similar to other synoptic gospels, remember synoptic? Looking together, three gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke. Synoptic gospel. John is not part of synoptic gospel. The Gospel of Mark does not provide a statement of purpose. All right? Only Gospel of John provides. Conclusions regarding Mark's purpose must be derived from an evaluation of the content of his gospel, as well as the circumstances surrounding its composition. Right? In terms of content, Mark's account clearly centers on what Jesus did more than what Jesus taught. Right? Wonderful way Mark explained. And 1 second, give me, there is. Sorry about that. I forgot to turn off my phone, and so the advertising people finds better time to call, and they keep on calling. All right. So what we understand about the purpose is that it doesn't state a purpose in his gospel. And the conclusion regarding Mark's purpose must be derived from evaluation of the content. That is what usually we do. If you don't see a purpose statement, we usually evaluate the entire gospel, right? So in terms of content, Mark's account clearly centers on what Jesus did. If you read, you will see how great the Lord is. He explains how great this man is. And we have a study like sharing the gospel or teaching the gospel someone by using Gospel of Mark, right? Teaching the gospel someone with using Gospel of Mark itself. Just simply using Mark itself, you can share the gospel and teach someone who this man is. All right. And of course, in the internet, in the YouTube, you have a lot of materials, resources available. How to teach someone the gospel who has no background of Christianity at all. Gospel of Mark is an excellent tool to teach them the gospel. All right. So he explains what Jesus did more than what Jesus taught. His gospel focuses on the activity of the Lord and especially on his working of miracles. In addition, Mark also shows an emphasis on the passion of Jesus. Some have even stylized Mark's gospel as a passion narrative prefaced by an extended introduction. Some people think that the main focus of Mark is the passion of Jesus with an introduction. Finally, Mark draws attention throughout his gospel on Jesus' persecution and suffering and corresponding suffering to be expected by his disciples. So the common denominators with all of this are Mark's Christology and his concept of discipleship. Right? Two things, Christology and concept of discipleship. Those are important themes that repeats there. From this, there emerges twofold purpose behind writing the gospel. So let's look at what is the twofold purpose. Number one, the primary purpose of Mark's gospel appears to be an apologetic on discipleship. It is an apologetic gospel, right? As suggested above, Mark presented balanced Christology between Jesus as the Son of God, having miracle working power, and Jesus as the Son of Man who suffers and dies. So that's what there is a balanced view. If you look at Luke, look at John, you will see either or even Matthew focusing one extreme. Matthew wants to present as Jesus as the king. Luke wants to present Jesus as Son of Man. John wants to present Jesus as Son of God. But Mark, he presents Jesus as the Son of God and Son of Man. Right? Again, please don't forget when I say what is Son of God, what is Son of Man. What is Son of Man means? What is Son of? Anyone?
Is it because Son of God, Jesus, because he came after coming to earth?
Okay. Right. But the biblical idea of Son of has more into it. All right. It is Son of. It is actually, you have to understand the Hebrew idiom or Hebrew style of using Son of. Hebrew style, like Jewish style. According to, for example, you will see in Genesis chapter 5, regarding Noah's age, we read, Noah was a son of 500 years. All right. And there are many times this word son of is used. Son of 500 years. Then when you come to the New Testament, you will see son of thunder. You will see son of consolation. Who is son of consolation? Anyone can say, who is son of consolation?
Is it Jesus?
No. In the New Testament, you read this one. Not Jesus. I mean, this is talking about a particular person. Anyone has any idea? Son.
It has been used for disciple, but I forgot the name.
Okay, it is. Is it disciple? Sons, son of thunders. Definitely, you might have heard this one. Anyone can say? Son of thunder. You know that thunder will never have son. You know that, right?
It's two disciples.
Two disciples.
Two disciples.
Yeah.
Sons of thunder.
Yes. Which is son, actually sons of Zebedee.
Is it Moses and Elijah?
No. It's two disciples actually. Sons of thunder are two disciples. Sons of Zebedee. Actually, it is the word for James and Peter. I think it is James and Peter. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Son of consolation. Who is that? Barnabas, Book of Acts. Or sons of exhortation. Right? Barnabas. Okay. Now think a minute. When you use the word son of consolation means consolation is not individual, right? So according to, remember just before we looked at Bovengers, right? Bovengers, that's what son of thunder. Son of consolation means Barnabas was a man who had the character qualities of this one. So according to Jewish usage, when we use the word son of something, it simply says that this person has character qualities of something that is being compared. So Barnabas was son of consolation because Barnabas was an excellent man who was able to comfort others, right? Help others, exhort others. It was his character. And sons of thunder, because these two individuals their life was like that. They were short-tempered people, right? Jumping into all kinds of action without thinking. So they were known as son of thunders, all right? So the problem Even one more thing, even in the Old Testament, when Noah was said to be son of 500 years, means Noah had the character qualities of 500-year-old man. That is what son of. So if you wanted to say that he is son of something, so there are two usages, right? One of the usages is that a father and son relationship, son of Noah, all right, the son of Abraham, son of David. That's father-son relationship. The second usage is, this one, what I said. What is that? When you compare someone with a character qualities or someone or something, you say son of. All right, son of. So when Bible said Noah was a son of 500 years, means Noah had the character qualities of a man with 500 years. So translators would say Noah was 500 years old. That's what translators would say. All right. Now, when Bible says Jesus as the Son of Man, it simply means Jesus had the character qualities of a man. All right. Character qualities of a man. Character plus qualities of a man. Son of Man means simply he is a man. All right. That means, what is the word Son of God means? People have a wrong thinking. They suddenly think, okay, Son of God means, okay, father had a son, so it is that relationship, right? No, actually, the Son of God means Jesus had all the character qualities of God. That is what it means. And you know what happened in John, if you read Gospel of John, anytime he would say, I am a son of God, or I came from the Father, I am from the Father, and they would say, when he says that he is the son of this Father in this way, they will take the stone and to kill him. You know what? What the Jewish people said? You are making yourself equal with God. Therefore, they took stones and tried to kill him. So the word son of, there can be a human relationship like father-son, but it also can have another relationship in a Jewish communication. And that is son of means, son of someone means he has the character and qualities of that thing that is being compared, or that person being compared. All right. So Mark presents Jesus in a balanced way. He talks about Jesus, Son of God and Son of Man. As a Son of God, that means as God, he's doing miracles. As a Son of Man, he suffers and dies. As a man, he suffers and dies. Mark carefully portrays both the full deity of Jesus as well as full humanity. So Son of God is deity. Son of Man, humanity. The one identified as the Son of God in the opening verse of the gospel and confessed as such by the centurion at the end of the gospel is the same one who dies a humiliating and agonizing death on the cross. Humiliating and agonizing death on the cross. Same Son of God dies. That's what Mark would say. Thus, his identity as a Son of God, Colossians, all right, corresponds with his role as the Son of Man. It is being compared. So he is actually a suffering Son of God. That is the way that Mark would present. Moreover, this concept of suffering becomes defining trait marking his followers, right? His disciples. Mark explains the idea of suffering so much because he's facing it. As disciples of the Lord, believers must be willing to suffer, and if necessary, even to die in following the Lord. And he would say, the Lord himself declared, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. To those facing mounting persecution and suffering, Mark wrote to instruct and encourage them as to true meaning of being follower of Jesus Christ. So that is the first purpose. Let me quickly go to the second purpose, and then we will finish. Second purpose for writing the gospel appears to be an evangelistic tool. All right, evangelistic tool. Returning to Mark's Christology, he emphasized Jesus as the Son of Man, centers on Jesus' role as the suffering servant, the one who lays down his life to redeem fallen humanity. Jesus made himself Son of Man. This is what he says. Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, to give a life ransom for many. The statement captures the essence of the good news and suggests that Mark wrote his gospel, among other reasons, to provide a record of the person and work of Jesus to be used as an evangelistic tool. All right? Those in Rome and elsewhere could use it not only to be further grounded in the truth of the gospel. So I wanted to just say, so yes, if anyone wants to know more about this evangelistic tool based on Mark, please let me know, right? I would give you some materials that would help you to about 5-6 lessons from the Gospel of Mark to explain the gospel and teach the people who have no idea about Christianity. All right. So because Mark is written with this purpose that people, those who read, will have an idea of what is evangelism actually is, how you need to explain, what are the aspects that needs to be explained, can be learned from here. All right. Well, we'll stop it here.